There we go. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this is our third in a series of 4 webinars put together for the Maryland Online Leadership Institute, which we refer to as MOLLE. In place of our residential program this year, we've put together the best we could do in a virtual environment. So I'd like to introduce our panel members and also let you know that this session will be recorded if you want to share with colleagues later on. So first we have Debbie Dorsey. She is an assistant professor of health at Harford Community College. Debbie holds a Master of Science in Exercise Physiology from Louisiana State University and has completed postgraduate work in public health and is a Quality Matters peer reviewer. She is also a Maryland Distance Learning Association board member. That's always a mouthful. MDLA. I like it better that way. Board member and a Maryland Online Leadership Institute alumni. She enthusiastically supports the use of mobile technology in education and has earned recognitions for her use of open educational resources, OER, and commitment to digital accessibility. We also have David Buck. David is a professor of English at Howard Community College. Prior to coming to Howard Community College in 2007, he was an English instructor for 8 years at, I always say this wrong, is it Rowan or Rowan? You're muted, I can't hear you.
Sorry, Rowan.
Rowan, got it. At Rowan College in Burlington County, New Jersey. From 2010 to 2014, he served as the e-learning director at Howard Community College, leading a 2011 migration from Blackboard to Canvas. Wow. I can only imagine what that was like. But it made Howard Community College one of the first institutions to adopt Canvas outside of the state of Utah. Currently, he's a facilitator of Howard Open, the college's OER initiative that seeks to support faculty who wish to adopt and implement OER in their courses in lieu of costly commercial textbooks. His professional interests include writing assessment quality and feedback, ungrading, mastery-based learning, and open pedagogy. He holds a master's degree in education from Temple University. And Daniel Izume is an assistant professor of business administration in the Department of Business and Technology at Baltimore City Community College. Daniel has over 6 years of face-to-face, hybrid, and online teaching experience. He teaches Intro to Business, Computers for Business Management, Personal Financial Management, Human Resources Management, and Computer Literacy. Daniel has served on multiple project teams implementing the design and development of learning management systems courses in his department to meet the Quality Matters standards. He's also a certified Quality Matters reviewer, and his research interests include using technology to increase student success, student engagement, and mobile technology. And then finally, we have our moderator, Dr. Sarah Felber, who is a faculty member in the Writing Across the Curriculum program at the University of Maryland Global Campus. She's also a MOLLE alumni. I always have to plug that. And the co-editor of the Journal of College Reading and Learning. She holds a master's degree in distance education and a doctorate in linguistics. Her work pursues equitable literacy education and promotes access and success for all students. So with that, Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you for the panel questions. Thank you again for all who have joined us today.
Okay, I'm really looking forward to hearing what our panelists have to say about their experiences with this really remarkable situation that we've all found ourselves in. So I'm going to just put some questions out there and let you discuss, in whatever way feels comfortable for you. And so the first question I wanted to pose was, what was your initial reaction when your college announced it was going to remote instruction?
Relief. But that's purely from a personal side, because I was concerned, of course, as everybody is getting infected and preventing infection. And I apologize because I wrote notes, and so if you see me look away, that's what I'm doing. I teach a flipped classroom model that relies very much on students in my face-to-face course utilizing our learning management system, working on a computer independently. So for that reason, I was not as concerned as I might otherwise be as to whether or not our students had the skills to convert over into a remote learning environment. And I felt at first fairly confident that they would have devices that they needed. Wasn't quite sure about their data access because in Harford, we have issues. We have dead zones where data just isn't that good. And I thought, well, it's possible that some students would rely on commercial sources of Wi-Fi. I found out that I was wrong about a lot of things. And of course, we don't know what we don't know. But I realized that there were a lot of students who there were things about them that I just didn't know, and it affected their ability to be successful.
If I chip in there, I think I will agree with Debbie too on some of the things she said. Can you all hear me?
Mhm. Yes, we can.
Okay. I also use the flipped teaching model in my classroom, and most of my courses are OER based. So it simply means students complete over 80% of their work using the learning management system, Canvas. So I wasn't that surprised. I was expecting it actually, because the week before, that was the second week in March, Morgan State, John Hopkins, even Coppin, had announced that they are planning to move to remote teaching. So I had prepped up my students in the classrooms. So what did I do? I made sure they all download Zoom on their mobile devices. I've been using Zoom for 3 years for my online virtual office hours. So I'm quite familiar with it. I told them to download the Canvas mobile app on their phones so that they can get notifications whenever I make an announcement. And to support my flipped model, I use Kahoot quiz, online Kahoot app to give online quizzes. So that makes the student read before they come to class, because everybody's excited when I tell them to pull up their phone, let's complete a quiz. And these are live quizzes. So I was pretty much ready, not that surprised. So, and it was a good outcome. It was a good outcome for me.
Yeah, it sounds like it was really helpful for you to see what was going on at other schools, and you were able to prepare yourself and your students.
Right.
I know that for those people who were on the earlier end of it, it may have been a very different experience.
Yeah, for me, it was not that much of a transition. I was already teaching fully online, so my courses were already there. Like Daniel and Debbie, my concerns were more for my students. As we probably know, I think it's the same at your institutions, but we rarely have students who take all 12 or 15 credits online. They usually mix and match some face-to-face, hybrid, and online. So I was more worried about my students and how they were going to deal with some of their face-to-face instructors suddenly going to a remote situation. So I kind of shifted my role a little bit and just basically said to my students, look, you're going to have some changes here with your other courses. You may have some instructors who aren't as comfortable using Canvas as I am. Have patience. Be patient with your professors. They are doing the best job that they can do in this circumstance situation. And then I basically said, if you have trouble finding some things that your professors are using in Canvas or in your course, and you have trouble finding them, ping me, and I'll try to help you and talk you through it. I had a few that basically said, look, I'm in this course, I have no idea what's going on. So I basically said, well, look here, and then kind of guide the person through. But most of the time my first reaction was concern for my students. Who's in the essential business? Some of my students were drivers for medical supplies. Some of them were ICU nurses and even in nurses in other medical practices. So I basically was worried about them and said, look, we're going to do what we do, and we'll be flexible, we'll be agile, and we'll get through it. So that's kind of how I reacted, was how kind of looking at it from my perspective of what's my role going to be from March until the end of the semester, and how the role will change a little bit.
For the participants, the other participants in the webinar, if you have follow-up comments or questions about anything, please go ahead and put them in the chat and we'll incorporate that into the discussion. So all three of you had mentioned the different technology tools that you were already using and that you set students up with to make sure that they were comfortable with them going forward. And I think about sometimes how this could have been very different if it happened 20 years ago when we didn't have Canvas and Kahoot and Zoom and all of that. So in that sense, we're very fortunate that we had those tools and some of that preparation. But on reflection, are there tools that you wish you or your students had already had prior to this event, things that would have made your life easier or would have changed the experience for you?
Yeah, one of the things that was really obvious after switching was how many students utilize mobile devices. And I'm sort of envious of you, Daniel, that you were already utilizing mobile devices in your course. I'm thinking that probably your students transitioned better than some of my students. It became very obvious how many students utilize the college's resources, particularly a printer, because I also, all of my courses, with the exception for one, which is an online course, interestingly enough, is OER. And so I was unaware of how many students print their OER material. And of course, then they don't have a printer at home. So I would say above everything, really, it's a printer, even above having a computer. Many of them did have devices, and probably all of us are aware that there are limitations to our LMS apps. There are certain things that they can't do. I don't know whether anyone has ever tried to write a paper using the Microsoft Word app. I did have students that's all they had access to. And so, you know, one of the challenges I think that was for all institutions was how are we going to help those students that don't have the devices that they need? But class doesn't stop. The semester doesn't stop until we, you know, have a solution. And so that was tricky.
Just like Debbie, one of the courses that I teach is Intro to Business, and it's an OER course. So I have about 60 to 70% of my students. So what they do is they usually print out the text for that particular chapter the week before, because they have to read it. So unfortunately, when we moved to remote learning, there was no time. There's this assumption that they probably have access to it, or they go to the nearest library. So there was a problem with equity. You know, there's this assumption. Not all students have access to internet connection. Not all students have access to personal learning devices. So it was a wake up call. I mean, I thought it was going to be 2 weeks. You know, we stay at home for 2 weeks because, for example, John Hopkins said, "Oh, our students are on spring break." Even Morgan Towson, they are on spring break. Okay, when they come back from spring break, it's going to be online for 2 weeks, and thereafter we see what happens. So I thought it was a short, you know, not a short space of time. So if I had known, I would have told the student they can use Weeper. There's something on my campus where they can print for really very cheap prices. And another thing that I wish my student could have had was Microsoft Office 2016 and above. I teach a course, Computers for Business Management. In other words, computer concepts and Microsoft Office, so which is more hands-on. Most of my face-to-face students, they come to school after my class, they go to the lab and complete their assignment because they don't have personal devices at home. And even though when they don't have internet access, so they do everything at home. Those that can't come to the campus, they go to the nearest library to complete their work. So it was a huge challenge, and I think I'm going to answer the other question. The other things I wanted to talk about is how I used Zoom to actually go into my students' computers, remotely with their permission, to actually show them, okay, this is what you need to do, especially when it comes to Excel and Microsoft Access, which is one of the two areas that my students usually struggle with.
I actually went the other way, away from technology a bit, because my students were already on Canvas, they were already online students. I actually wanted to check in with them because I don't know about you guys, but a lot of my students, not a lot, but a good percentage, they ghosted for a little bit. They went silent for a little bit. So I was like, oh man, I better connect with these. So what I did is I went to the roster and I got their phone numbers. I called every one of my students. Number one, their phone numbers on the rosters are not accurate. I got parents, I got uncles, I got grandparents. I'm like, yeah, I want to talk to John. Yeah, so why don't you have his phone number? I said, this is the one on the roster. But anyway, I called all of my students. There was about, I don't know, 60 or 70 of them. It took me a whole day. I just sat and did it. I said, hey, this is David, your instructor. I just want to let you know that I'm here for you. I just want to see how you're doing, and just basically tried to get that human connection with them. I've always wanted to do that. I've always heard that, it's a good best practice to kind of connect, and this forced me to do it. And it was very interesting. I learned a lot. A lot of my students were chatty. They really had some good conversations. I learned more about them than I had planned, but a lot of them really appreciated that I actually just made the call. And if they didn't answer, I just left a message. So a lot of them pinged me in Canvas and said, oh, thanks so much for doing that, for calling me and that. So that was the one technology that I wish I would have probably had before to kind of make that connection. The other thing was I was already in a virtual book club. We called it Book Zoom. I was doing it with a faculty member from Montgomery College. And we were using Zoom to have our book discussions. We use Twitter as our back channel. So we go after the remote learning was enacted and everybody was on Zoom. We had our March meeting and we got Zoom bombed. I don't know if any of that happened to you guys. Yeah. And it's where people were just flooding the internet, finding Zoom meetings and crashing them. A lot of them were just bad, posting inappropriate stuff, basically taking over the discussion. So I basically had a bad interaction with Zoom right from the beginning. And so my point was this: a lot of our, I don't know about your institutions, but a lot of our face-to-face instructors really, and I don't blame them, they made that connection that I'm just going to flip to Zoom and continue on my face-to-face. So now they're talking about having students sit in a Zoom session for a 2-hour to 3-hour lecture, and it just was not tenable, and it wasn't equitable for some students who had to care for maybe sick family members. So my advice to other people, if they wanted it, I would just basically say, Zoom is not the substitute for your face-to-face. You might want to be a little bit more flexible with the technology. And then what Debbie and Daniel have said, not every student had the ability to sit in a Zoom session and had the technology for it. So I kind of actually went the other way. I went old school. I went limited. I basically just advised my colleagues, look, if you have to even email Word documents to your students and have them do the work through email, do it, whatever works best for you. So that was kind of the technology focus that I took.
Yeah, and it's interesting, the other part, in addition to the equity, is that there are a lot of students who rely on nonverbal cues to truly understand material. And we would hope that that translates into Zoom, Teams. It does not, because they're not only looking for the instructor's nonverbal cues, but they're also looking for how are my people in my class responding to what's being said too. I don't think that they're consciously aware of that. But it became very obvious when we switched. In fact, I didn't really rely on Zoom or Teams. We use Teams, not a huge fan, but because it almost was a greater distraction. You know, if you tried to have a group of people and you're talking to them, I found that it was better for my students who were struggling a bit to meet individually through Zooms. But I still think it was not the equivalent experience for many of them because of what they rely on.
Yeah, and the thinking there, Debbie, is that you have a student, right, in your class. They could be in 4 other classes that just went remote. So now they have 5 or 4 remote classes in a pandemic, and we are not teaching here. This is basically crisis teaching. Let's be honest with ourselves. And we're expecting students to be able to have the attention span to continue the engagement. Boy, so that is a major consideration using technologies, that it can muddy the water and it can produce a bunch of static that some of our students aren't equipped to get through.
Yeah, totally agree.
Just to add to what David said about going old school, in all my face-to-face classes, the first day of class, after the whole introductions and breaking the ice, I usually pass out a piece of paper that has a column for your name, your mobile phone number, and your personal email. So I do that.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I get some pushbacks sometimes from some students. Why do you need my mobile number? Why do you need my personal email address? I said, well, just in case I can't reach you and I need to reach you. I know most of you don't check, most students don't check their email, college assigned email addresses. So I usually have that document on the first day of class. So if I'm trying to reach a student, as David alluded to, if you go to their student portal and pull up their phone numbers, it's either it's not working or their parents, their uncles or something like that. So I usually have their up-to-date information on the first day of class.
Thank you. It's a lot of really good insights. And we have a discussion going on in the chat where Larry Reagan had asked about how our colleagues were situated to this transition who may not have been prepared necessarily to teach online. And Shinta Hernandez gave a nice description of a really, sounds like a very well thought out training course that they have used at Montgomery College, a 7-week course that faculty are required to either take or demonstrate competency in order to continue teaching in this online environment. And I'm really, so I encourage everyone, if you haven't had a chance to look at that chat, it's been really detailed and interesting. And I'm curious about the process, because 7 weeks, and she said it's wrapping up now, that ball must have been rolling pretty early. So I'm curious and impressed about that, making that happen. But while people are looking at that, I wanted to go on with another question for our panelists about your instructional approaches. So I know that we've mentioned flexibility with our students. Are there ways that you have changed your instructional approach to meet the needs of students who were learning to navigate the stay-at-home order, other than the things that you may have already mentioned?
I used to be very firm with my deadlines, and I couldn't be. I had a student who was in the Guard, and I had students who also were first responders. I also had students that had a number of elementary school age children. And that actually became very obvious with the online courses that I teach. That was, which makes sense because online courses appeal oftentimes to people that are working and have children. And so where I would have perhaps thought to myself, well, I don't need to adjust my due dates for you because you're used to it. I had to take a step back and go, yes, but you were used to it before there was a pandemic. So I had to adjust my rules. I also found that one of the discoveries that I made, and I was not surprised. We're at a community college. We have students of, and I don't like this word, but academic readiness. And so we knew that on some level there could be students who had a difficult time with reading comprehension. And what I found was that I did need to supplement my instructions for assignments with video. They needed to hear my voice. They needed to hear inflection. They needed a bit more. I didn't do that immediately, but when I did, it made an obvious difference. And that is actually something that I will likely continue to do because I think it's just beneficial for everybody.
For me, I was using Zoom, which really helped me a lot. And why did I use Zoom? So I looked at my students. The first week of class, everybody does this. The students have to post their introductions. So one of the things that I do ask is, what do you do for a living? What kind of jobs do you have? What kind of side jobs do you have? Side hustles, as they call it. So in a particular class, I discovered that 80% of my students are in the gig economy. So it's either they're doing Uber Eats, DoorDash, and all that. So Zoom really worked for me because now they can be on their break. They can take 30 minutes, 45-minute break while they listen to my lecture using their mobile phones. So it was really very, very interesting. It worked out for me, for not everybody, but for most of my students, because I already saw that this is the type of job they do. And another thing that I did was, for myself, I got a VPN. David mentioned the Zoom bomb, where people can just get into your Zoom meetings and just that. So because of when I heard about that, I think it was the second week in April. So I had to get a VPN installed on all my devices to prevent that from happening to me. There is an app, most of you probably know the app. It's called Remind, like REMIND. It works like a text messaging app. So you wanted this connection with the students. So I insisted that they should all download the app during one of my Zoom meetings, and they sent me a text message. So that really, really helped me. It kind of connected me to most of my students. They can send me, we're all in love with our phones. So that really helps me in connecting with the students. One thing that really helped again was I went to my discussions on their Canvas and specifically set up a cyber cafe, a place to ask specific questions that relates to the challenges students are facing. Mm-hmm. So I have a lot of lists. Oh, I don't have Wi-Fi. Oh, I don't have a printer. Oh, I don't have Microsoft Office 2016. So I was able to every week do a summary and send it to my associate dean to say, hey, this is what my students are going through right now. What can we do? Because that's what they told us, whatever. So that really helps me. And this is something I also, just like Debbie, intends to, continue during the fall. We've not made a decision during the fall at BCCC if we're going to go purely online or the hybrids, online or face-to-face. But these are some of the things that I intend to continue to do. I just want to talk about the Kahoots. Students love it. As I said, I use it in my face-to-face class. Now, how did it work in Zoom? It worked the same way. It worked the same way. Students have the app on their phone. I put the code on the screen, and on my screen, they could see the rankings. And they love to compete with each other. So that I use that to buttress, to kind of solidify my flipped learning model. It forces them to read before they come to class, because the quizzes are actually live quizzes, and they have to do very well. So, and they actually take the pictures of the screen, the number 1, number 2, number 3, and put it on their social media site, especially Instagram. So that is something I do with my face-to-face class initially, but now I want to actually introduce it to my online students. The students that are registered originally in my online courses, I don't do that, but this is something I intend to continue going forward.
That's awesome. And it seems like, I think quizzes are popular with all age groups, because I know my 10-year-old, he has teachers who had done it, and he looks forward to getting into the class. He says, I can't be late for the Kahoot quiz. Right. And so to hear that your students are also posting the results on social media, I think sounds like we can see it's a very versatile tool.
My instructional approach was, again, I defaulted to simplicity. I basically, I do a mastery-based learning approach, so there's no grades, it's just all feedback. And I basically took all of the remaining evidence, and that's basically how the language I use. You demonstrate evidence of your mastery. So I put a one module right at the top of Canvas. This is the remaining evidence that's required of the course. So I limited it all down to maybe 3 or 4 things. One of the things that I was braced with is the idea of what's my essential pedagogy. This was a great opportunity to kind of get rid of the fluff and get down to the basics of what is my essential instructional model, and how can I, leverage that in this event. So what I did was I basically put that module right at the top of Canvas. That was the remaining course evidence. While this was happening, we were in all of these training. I don't know about your institutions, but they got all the faculty together, tried to do these last-minute technology training, which is the worst model for a pandemic. There was about 100 of us in one room sharing all these laptops, which is just ridiculous. And basically trying to get everybody to, and I don't blame them. They did what they needed to do. What most of my colleagues were talking about is, how do I transfer my instructional approach into a remote situation? So I put this in the chat. Please let me know if the link didn't work. But I put together a Teach Remotely handout, a graphic, an infographic for my my division, and I basically just tried to tell everybody, don't try to replicate what you were doing in a face-to-face instructional environment into an online. You can't do it. It's not feasible, and it's not fair. So my encouragement was to default to simplicity. You can use all of the technology, which is great, but no snazzy tech tool is going to replace the human presence that you have in your course. Your pedagogy of empathy, your ability to connect with your students. So I basically tried to focus my instruction on the basics. What's going to be my communication? What's the content? Where the students are going to go for that content? What's the engagement level? And how am I going to assess? And that's basically what I think we all could do, and no matter what discipline, academic discipline we're in, we could focus on those instructional events to say, here's where I'm going to trim it down. So I really trimmed down my instruction. What did I learn from this? Well, what I learned is what Debbie said. When students go to at least for Canvas, the LMS app on their phone, they're trying to do these complex assignments on their phones. I feel so bad. So what I'm doing now is I'm moving away from the LMS as much as I can. As an ungrader, I already have a problem with the LMS, since everything in the LMS points to the gradebook, and I'm just done with that. So what I'm going to do is have blogs, student blogs that my students will do, all offline. So if you've ever blogged on a phone, easy peasy. You do it and then you post it. And I'm trying to get everything off of the LMS out to some other third-party tools, with, of course, worrying about FERPA and all that other stuff, but trying my best to kind of simplify their experience in the course. So start of fall, my assumption is it's going to be the same. It's not going to be anything normal. We're still in crisis mode. Maybe even worse if what they're saying is going to happen, where the curve goes up in the fall with the flu season. So my point is, I'm trying my best to keep it flexible, agile, equitable, but also simple. And that's going to benefit all of us, I think. Even for me, it'll benefit. So that's my approach. Don't know if it'll work, bumps in the road, but that's how we learn.
Yeah, and when you list those different things you're trying to achieve, flexible, simple, agile, to me, and equitable, of course, these are things we should be aiming for all the time, right? So I think if there's some bright spot of what's going on, maybe it's highlighting to us the things that we can and should do to achieve all of those aims for our students in regular times as well.
Yeah. And it's funny, Sarah, because we teach our students, oh, the learning process. You have to fail. You have to go through things and get feedback and try again. And yet when it comes to us as faculty, you know, the pushback is, I don't want to change. I don't want to learn something new. And so I think if we all approach it from that perspective, which is equitable for us as well, keeping our mental well-being in mind, simplicity to me is my mantra going forward. And I think we will fail along the way. Some of the stuff I'm going to try this fall is going to probably bomb, and that's fine. Pick myself up and try again. But the point being is that I want my students to know that I'm going through this as well. Your instructors are going through this as well. This is a different event that none of us have ever seen before. So we have to have some compassion and some empathy and grace. I think a boatload of grace. If we can inject grace into everything we do, I think we won't go wrong.
We have it.
Sorry,
go ahead.
I had, and this is sort of jumping ahead, I think, to the next question, but I had faculty contacting me saying, what do I do? We're supposed to be using our LMS. And some of it was just as simple as have them handwrite it, take a picture, send it to you. Let's not make this overly complicated. And even if it doesn't go through the LMS, because I think one of the things that sort of struck me is, as faculty, we're always waiting for our leadership to come back and say, now what are the metrics? And if you don't have them, right? If you don't have that, and of course we rely then on our LMS to, pull that data. And so, if you don't have that exactly, it can be difficult. But then it was, explaining to faculty, well, create a column, a manual enter column, and if you feel like you've got to have it, you're like, well, then I don't have a sample of work. And I was like, you can't control the world. So, what I feel like at our institution, at least, our administration has said, look, we get it. We want to get through this. Please think of the students. But again, it's always kind of playing in the back of my mind because they love their data. Are they going to say, well, now let's start looking at, spring of this year compared to spring of this year? And faculty are already gearing up to say, no, we can't. There's no way. We didn't have the tools that we need to truly capture that. And besides being at community colleges, I mean, it's just inherently difficult to do that anyway. Any given semester, you're going to have a huge variety of students. And so that is the one thing that I just sort of, it's tucked in the back of my mind. And so our division has actually, some of our faculty have started taking observational notes. Here's the number of students who said this. In a way, it's a form of documentation. Maybe it can be quantified, who knows? But if anything, it helps us to kind of have a diary of, here's what happened before. And I just need to keep this in mind because we will be in a remote learning environment. I love that term, in the fall. And so let's build on it and let's not worry as much about documenting and having that data.
Well, you've all given some really good examples of, like segueing into our next topic, which is connecting and supporting with other faculty. And you've talked about providing resources, helping faculty understand that face-to-face teaching is not the same as online teaching, with which Shinta had commented in the chat that their training really helped faculty to understand that. So I'm curious, in addition to, and you may have more to say about the teaching support that you've either given or received from your colleagues during this time, but also I'm curious about the well-being support, and I think that's something that David alluded to. So what things have you done to help connect with your colleagues to, just for your own mental well-being?
I probably shouldn't admit to this, but the colleague that I was running with prior to this, we continued to run. We attempted to run in a single file or have this. I was laughing because I was like, we need to design some kind of 6-foot thing that we can run with, strapped to our shoulders. So we're always aware of this. That never happened. But we did continue to run, and it helped us both tremendously to just maintain, one, a healthy behavior, and two, that sort of connection. I know it was difficult for some of my colleagues, and I think it was difficult for some of my colleagues who were on two separate sides. No kids, single, living by themselves, 1 million kids, all under the age of 10. And
Wow.
so the way that I attempted to help was to completely understand that I was very lucky. I have a 17-year-old who's very self-directed, and which enabled me to be more available. And it was a blessing and a curse, because then I got a lot of questions from faculty, but I was able to be helpful, and that's gratifying as well.
At my institution, what we did was, for 2 days, classes were suspended. This is to give or afford the faculty members to kind of transition to remote learning. So what did we do? So for those 2 days, all faculty, including adjuncts, were required to attend, we call it the Canvas Refresher course and Canvas Essentials course. So I was one of the facilitators for the Canvas Refresher course. These are people who have been teaching online for many, many years for the advanced users. And for the Essentials, those are for people, mostly for our adjuncts, who don't like to use Canvas, for some of them, for whatever reasons. So that's really, did it work? I don't know, because I remember the last webinar that we attended last week. I don't know who made that, who said this about one size fits all model. That didn't work. So, and we realized that going forward. So what my department did, business and technology, was to say, Daniel, you be the resource person for the business disciplines. So I had to work with 2 adjuncts that were finding it extremely difficult to teach remotely. Of course, I added that as part of my professional development credits, because I spent close to 2 hours every week with each of them, trying to walk them through Canvas, how to use Canvas efficiently. And some of you that are using Canvas will probably notice that Canvas had upgraded some of their features, like the new gradebook, things you can do with the new gradebook, things you can do in setting due dates. Now you can set due date for multiple assignments at the same time, be individual assignments. So those things I had to show these adjuncts. I worked with them for 5 weeks, and that was how I was able to support them. And of course, the students too. I talked about a course that I teach, Microsoft Office. And students read the steps, they still don't know what to do. Through Zoom, I was able to remotely assist them, have access to their computers, and kind of show them exactly what to do. So it worked well for me, and I believe other instructors, experienced instructors, also had people that they were mentoring in our department, people who were struggling with using Canvas. And you'll be surprised. I mean, you'll be surprised that something you considered simple, you thought everybody should know. For example, creating an assignment in Canvas that you think you should be able to do it. People struggle with that. They know what to do. Just like our students, P-Tech. Some of you are familiar with P-Tech. These are 10th to 12th graders who take college classes. I had this class last semester. It was a business class, and I wanted them to pull up Excel spreadsheet. And I said, hey guys, turn on your computer. I want you to pull up the application Microsoft Excel. They didn't know what to do. Most of them have no idea or clue what I was talking about. They can use your phones. So because there's this assumption that because these young at heart, they know how to use their phones, means they should know a lot about computers. No, that's not true. More than half of them were looking at me. Okay, I said, pull up Microsoft Word. Maybe 1 or 2 of them knew what I was talking about. So I see that challenge in them. And I saw that also in some of the faculty, especially adjuncts, who have been used to coming in front of the class, teach face-to-face, still grade the old way, paper grading, and put the grades in to Canvas manually. So it was an eye-opener for me. So the one-size-fits-all model didn't really work. Most people wanted the individualized like training because they had specific questions. How do I do this? So that was what happened. And this semester, yeah.
Yeah, for me, I'm on Twitter, so I do a lot of, for academic purposes, so I do a lot of chats, and I've connected with a ton of other educators across the country and world, and it's been such a good resource for me. A lot of people are well informed on things like trauma-informed pedagogy, how to deal with our students, the ways that we approach the fall in our instruction. One of my resources I follow her on Twitter is Robin DeRosa from the Open Teaching and Learning Collaborative at Plymouth State University. I put this in the chat. She's created it's called the ACE framework, and it stands for Adaptability, Connection, and Equity. And it's a framework that you can go to, and you can basically align your assignments, your course, or even institutional to being sensitive about the context that we're in, aligning our mission and values. The thinking here is that we have values and mission statements at our institutions, but when a pandemic happens, suddenly we forget about those things and we just go and do what we need to do to keep the business and the trains running on time. So the idea here is that we should go back to our missions and values and build a framework that actually helps ensure that there's connectivity, equity, and adaptability in our instruction. So that's been a great resource for me. And I really think that we're going to need to do a better job of that in the fall, especially what Debbie and Daniel mentioned is the adjunct faculty. These are the precariat. These are people who are in very precarious situations. They might have economic struggles and challenges, and I think we need to do a lot of outreach for them to make them feel connected even more so in the fall, especially if we continue this remote teaching and learning. So I think the resources are there for faculty to engage with, but I think every institution is going to have to think quickly and deeply about how we continue to keep that community of instruction going. And I love Zoom for division meetings. I don't know about you guys. I put myself on mute, put up my little picture. It's awesome. I hate meetings, but if this is how we're going to interact, then I guess that's how we're going to have to interact. But I think we can do better about learning communities and other outside things like what Daniel was talking about, the ways that we can connect and support each other. I think that's an important part.
It was just sort of happened to be that this particular semester, I did a temporary position as our coordinator for our Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, CETL, and we just fast shifted gears and created a SharePoint site and just, tried not to overwhelm folks, sort of cherry-picked good sources because there's this tendency to just start throwing all kinds of stuff up there, but we picked some resources and we put it up there, and every day it sort of expanded to emerging need. But the other thing that I did was I created videos. It's just sort of something that I like to do. And I knew that I had to, I knew that in some ways they had to be funny. We're stressed, so I had to put some humor into them just to keep people, like, take the edge off. Okay, we can do this. And chunk it. Like, you can't throw all this information at people that, are sort of like, what am I doing? It has to be, we have to start applying our best practices that we know. We chunk information. We try to make it very applied to what they're doing. For example, putting up the how-tos from Microsoft, those are, generic. You put them up, here's how to do this, that people don't always relate to them because it may not be how they're using it. It gives all this extra information that people don't know. And so that we need to also, when we support our faculty, make it those tools very specific to their purpose. It has to be applied for people to understand it. And it has to be framed in a way that's encouraging. You can do this, we got it, don't worry. There's all of these other stressors. This doesn't have to be one of them,
That's a great point, Debbie. Having a social and emotional learning component to everything we do. If not now, I don't know when.
Yeah. And fortunately, that is a talent of mine, is to be funny. So I was able to take that. At least I think so. I don't know, but I was able to take that and put it into videos that sort of did have, and I was able to sneak in a little bit of learning into them as well, very subtly. So that people were able to say, okay, this isn't going to be difficult. I can do this part of this. The other thing that I thought we need to do is, if we have a skill that we need to identify, our college needs to identify, this is your person. If I have a skill of figuring out what's going wrong with a person's mobile device, I can figure out pretty quickly that yes, you're using a mobile device and how to work. So establishing point of contacts for people that they can reach out to and ask, and that we're available to them, I think is very important. And it should go across your division, or across the college. It shouldn't just be exclusive to your division, because you also start to find that, so anatomy and physiology does this. Exercise physiology can learn something from that as well. We start to find that commonality that can help us.
I just
Thank
wanted
you.
to add.
Oh, go ahead.
Hi, Sarah. Sorry, I just wanted to add this. There's a recent survey that was released about. It was done during the pandemic, during spring 2020. One of the two areas, the first two areas, the student wish, that they could get help from. One was engagement. How they could stay engaged, how professors, communicate with them, and using Zoom. And so a lot of students mentioned that it was a lot of one-sided. It wasn't a two-way type of engaging piece. So they really complained about that. The second one was motivation. They didn't have that motivational piece. What does that mean? A student, one of my students said it. Normally I wake up at 7, I get into my car by 8, I'm in class by 9. He or she looks forward to that. But right now, there's no motivating piece for them to wake up in the morning, to stay in front of the screen and start, watching videos or using Zoom to listen to lectures. So those are the two pieces. The engaging piece, student complaint wasn't there, and also the motivational piece. So at my college, we have a student counselor, students who are having problems with fatigue and some mental health issues and things like that. So I usually refer those students to that department because they needed motivation, something. Because after the first 3 weeks, I was having 70% attendance. It dropped to 50% suddenly. And it was a major concern. I have to use the app called Remind, text message. Hey, what is happening? Give me a call when you get the chance. I'll be available within this period. So those are the two major pieces that they really think we could do better.
Thank you. And we're getting close to the end of our hour. So I just want to thank all of you for participating in this discussion. I know I learned a lot from it. As faculty who are already involved in some sort of online learning, in a way it's like our shining moment to share our expertise, but it's also a major growth moment for us all as we're trying to figure out how to make this situation work for us and for students and for faculty who are not sort of the target audience for online learning. As you explained, the motivation, there's students who love online classes normally, and there's students who do not. And now we all have to do the same thing. And so it's very helpful to hear everybody's input on how you're approaching these challenges. Is there anything for the other attendees, if you had any other comments you wanted to put in the chat before we wrap up?
Right. And I'll give a brief summary. I took pages of notes as you were speaking. The one thing that I did notice, I don't know if anybody ever watches Food Network, but they have the Triple D, Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. We have David, Daniel, and Debbie. And it was really a fantastic talk from all three of you. Some of the things that stuck out, and this has been a theme through all of our webinars, is that we need to be supportive and have grace and be forgiving, not only of our students, but of ourselves, because we are navigating channels that, you know, we may have had experience in the past, but our students may not have. And those challenges, whether it's having children at home or just being isolated from friends, family, and colleagues, it's something that is new to all of us, and we don't really seem to have a clear end in sight for that. David, your comments about connecting virtually, I saw you were one of the first people to send out resources for English classes on the OER site, and we are always grateful to be able to share across institutions, but I think this is the time that for open educational resources, I hear the three of you have all used them. This is the perfect opportunity to expand that network. We're all doing the absolute best we can, but face-to-face instruction does not translate to online instruction because we have a Zoom meeting. And those resources that can be shared, and I have shared across my multiple networks, have been extremely helpful. We realize that the one-size-fits-all approach does not, it doesn't work, and defaulting to simplicity. I love that statement, David, that yes, we have technology and we all rushed to do the best we could for our students, and we thought all these bells and whistles would be good for them, but really just getting back to the basics for them to make sure that they had all the tools that they need and the support that they needed. That flexibility piece, Debbie, that you mentioned, yes, we were all hard on our deadlines before, but we also didn't anticipate having our kindergartners and, let's see, 3rd grade, 7th grade, and 5th grade home with us while we were trying to manage all of that. I truly appreciate everybody's input today. This was really fantastic, and thank you so much. If there are other questions, please put them in the chat, but we'll wrap up in respect for, I know Sarah has a faculty meeting to get to. Thank you. There's another resource that was posted in the chat. This has been recorded and will be posted, and I appreciate everybody's time today. Thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
You.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Dave. Bye.